welcome to Down to Earth. I'm Daphne Richards. This week's question is, why didn't my iris bloom? Well, there are several possibilities. Most likely, they become overgrown and crowded, and it's past time to divide them. To do this, you'll need to dig them up with a shovel and simply cut them into pieces. If the clump of leaves is really large, you'll probably need to do this with the shovel, the cutting. You don't have to be too careful when you're doing this. Irises are pretty tough. Divide the plant into smaller clumps, which should be fairly obvious as to how to divide them, what size. But if not, brush away some of the soil from the surface until you find the rhizome, the underground stem. Then push back the leaves and use a large, sharp knife to cut through the rhizome and the roots below. Then you should plant one of these smaller clumps back into the original hole and fill that with soil around it, because it will be a larger hole. You also should find a new home in your garden for the other clumps that you have, or find a friend to share a pass-along plant. If the plant does not seem to be overgrown and perhaps has yellow flowers and yellow leaves, it could also be that the plant needs a little fertilizer. You can go ahead and fertilize now, and in this case, I would suggest using a fertilizer with a nutrient ratio designed to encourage blooming. These products have low nitrogen, and that's the first number on the label. That's low nitrogen compared to the phosphorus, that's the second number on the label. Nitrogen encourages green growth, so lowering the amount of nitrogen will encourage the plant to focus most of its energy on producing flowers instead of leaves. One other possibility is that your iris may not be getting enough sun, and if that's the case, simply dig it up and move it to a sunnier spot. Our plant this week, keeping with our question, we decided to highlight bearded iris. Although these are not native, they are fabulously adapted to our climate and soils. In fact, there's virtually nowhere in the nation where irises don't perform well. The large, dense flowers are simply beautiful, and they remind me of my grandmother, who had lots of bearded irises in her garden. These are also known as German irises, and they're usually taller than other irises. Since they're clumping, they do tend to spread a bit, but if they outgrow their space, just divide them and they'll look and perform much better for you. Irises seem to thrive in virtually all conditions, from heavy soil to loose sand. But rocky soil isn't really the best, and if you have heavy clay, be careful not to overwater and cause the rhizomes to rot. When they're not blooming, the spiky leaves of these plants add wonderful structure to our gardens. But with their height and their 6 to 7 inch blooms and those bold flower colors, they do tend to be overwhelming in most any space. So be careful not to plant them among more delicate plants in your garden that might be overwhelmed by their presence. And be sure to give your irises plenty of sun, or at the very least, not too much shade. Our pet this week is Jack, a miniature schnauzer who loves his dad's garden, and we do too. Seth Moore set up this gorgeous bird bath for other garden friends, but they're willing to share with Jack. Hey, being on constant lookout for squirrels can make a guy thirsty. To do in your garden this week, with autumn, which is the best time of year to plant a tree, approaching, go tree shopping and go ahead and dig that hole so you'll be ready to go once the temperatures begin to stay reliably cooler. You should also divide those spring blooming plants now. We'd love to hear from you, so please visit klru.org/ctg to send us your questions, favorite plants, and garden pets.